Welcome back to Small Changes, Big Shifts. I'm Dr. Michelle Robin with my co-host, Bayleigh Sosa. You're going to notice something a little bit different today. In case you're watching us on YouTube TV, we actually have gone to video. We'll be going back and forth throughout the next few months, just because sometimes our guests don't live in Kansas City. But today we're really privileged to have one of my favorite people in Kansas City joining me on the show today, Ron Hill. I've known Ron about 18 years. And Ron was a business owner, entrepreneur. We met through the Helzer Mentoring Program. I've got a chance to know his beautiful wife, Barbie, as well as his boys. And what I love about Ron, he's a learner and he's taken some really interesting paths over the last few years. So Ron, welcome to Small Changes, Big Shifts.
Thank you, Michelle. Super exciting to be here and your first video. That's exciting. And you've made such an impact in my life. And I was just thinking on the way here how long we've known each other. And I think it is right about 18 years. And from the moment we literally energetically crossed paths, like you have made such an impact. So I'm super excited to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're
Have
here.
this conversation.
And Zach reminded me that he'd met you. So to our audience, Zach, who's been with me forever, is behind the scenes orchestrating this. And reminded me that you were in our 30-year video with my 30 lessons. And so it's amazing that it's already been 4 years since that time frame.
Yeah, sometimes when I look at the time frame, like it could be 10 years or was that 5 minutes but I said to Zach when we got here, how long ago was that? So 4 years.
Well, you've had an interesting run the last 4 years. You know, you sold your business, Redemption Plus, during COVID.
Yes.
And then you started down this whole conscious leadership path, and now you do a conscious leader's quest. Tell me how your life has shifted since you let go of Redemption Plus.
Well, I love the way that you asked that and just, translating from talking about like time, right? And I did this video 4 years ago. I sold my company going on 6 years ago, which actually seems crazy to me because I spent almost 25 years building Redemption Plus and sold it in the middle of a pandemic and then created space for what might happen next. And so, all of the things that have happened since that point have brought me to this place where I've been very clear about how do we change the world by changing ourselves? And it's one thing to do our own inner work, but when we can do it as a leader, then we have the opportunity to create these huge ripples and shifts throughout the world, right? Because most of us, we spend most of our time at work. And so when we have the opportunity to change all of the people that we work with, and we do that by starting with our own inner work. So for me, the thing that I'm most passionate about is this idea, if we help leaders discover the best version of themselves, then they can help those around them create the same thing for themselves. And that ultimately creates ripples throughout the world.
Well, and I think about leaders. We're all leaders. We're leaders of our family, leaders of our own life, whether maybe we're a business leader, we're a community leader. And so one thing we're in this middle of the series, which makes it extra special for you to be here, is we're in the middle of a series around kind of 6 decades, 60 years. And spent some time with my brother, Mike, and then the Finkston family, 3 generations came on the show. And we talked about making that generational change. And then we had our friend Lori Mallory on, who has triplets. And I was also a Gigi, grandma, and how that she's trying to, with her servant heart, help transition her own generational well-being. And then we're here with you today. And as I mentioned in the intro, is I get a chance to know your boys. And that's one thing I love about my life is it's not just typically one person. It's also maybe the significant other and then the children. And then one day it'll be your grandchildren.
Yes.
And so, because I'm committed to hanging out a while. So when you think about generational change and this work of conscious leadership, what comes to mind for you?
Well, when you talk about it like that, I think about my own inspiration for the change that I made was my oldest son, Alec. So, both of my boys. And we had lots of conversations, I know about my own journey, but also about Alec's journey. And so as he started to struggle when he was in his teens, I had somebody say to me, just very, very boldly said, stop trying to fix your son and go fix yourself. And only when you fix yourself can you allow him the space to heal. And so that's what it took for me to leap into action and to do something that felt very scary, to go to a program called Save a Warrior. But through that, I started to understand my own lens of trauma and the work that I needed to do I didn't have the language then, but now I would say to become the best version of myself. So I think, when I think about how you're saying that, like generationally, like we have to heal ourselves. And then that affects those that we lead. And so you've opened this by saying, right, we're all leaders of some sort. And I had a mentor, Dr. Danny Friedland, who always said, leadership is not a role, it is a way of being. It is a way that we should all be going through the world. And so when we take that role on and we heal ourselves, then we get to heal our children, we get to heal our relationships. And so that to me, when you start thinking about one person that heals themselves, and whether they have one child or no children, right? But just thinking about like spouse, family, like we go up, we go down, we go out, all of the people that we connect with, when we can energetically show up as that best version, then that starts to create ripples throughout the world.
Well, what really stuck with me and something somebody told me early in my parenthood journey was it's 80% about connection and 20% about leading. And I think that, I heard it from a parent perspective, but I think in our conversation, that's just leadership, period. It's 80% about that connection first and then 20% about leading them because you don't want people to just blindly follow you. You want them to follow you because they believe in the mission, they believe in what you're doing, they have the same passion. And you can't really connect to that unless you know who you are, right? Unless you've done that inner work already to know, yes, that's the connection piece. And you have to be able to open yourself up. And so you're really taking that interesting approach into organizations, into leaders. And you oftentimes talk about the only way out is through. And so can you explain to our listeners really what does that mean and how is that approach transformational in the work that you're doing?
Absolutely. I'm happy to answer that question. Before I answer that, I want to go back to what you said about connection, right? You were talking about 80% connection. And so with Conscious Leaders Quest, we have there's 4 pillars of conscious leadership. And the first one is connection. So one of the things I wanted to connect with you on is this idea that for us to connect to others, right? Which is this idea of leading and how we all become leaders. It's not necessarily a role, it's a way of being. So we have to connect to ourselves first. And I think one of the biggest challenges of probably most people, and not just in the workplace as a leader, is sometimes we don't know how to connect with ourselves, but we have to be able to connect with ourselves in order to be able to connect with groups. And then ultimately, we can create this magic, which is unlocking the collective wisdom of a group. So anyway, so I just wanted to acknowledge that connection piece. So I think that is really, really important with leadership. And so that transitions to this idea of the only way out is through. And the simplicity is we have to do our own work. You can't outsource it. I mean, I could probably leave it at that, but there's a lot of depth there. And some of that comes from work that I have done helping companies unlock their purpose. And so that's when I sold Redemption Plus, I was very passionate about how do we build purpose-driven companies where we have the opportunity to do good and be profitable. And the data says that we actually, the more good we can do within the organization, the more purpose-driven we are, the more profitable that we will become. And what I found is that very often the owners, the CEOs of the company were all in on that, but they wanted somebody else to do it. And all of that work would literally just completely go away because that leader wasn't willing to do the hard work of, let's just say sitting quietly, right? How do we move ourselves out of the workplace? We sit quietly with ourselves. And so it's this idea that as leaders, we have to go through the middle. We have to do the hard work, and then it gets to ripple down through the organization.
What makes me think of the quote, do as I say, not as I do, instead of do as I do.
Do as I do. Yeah.
Flat.
Wouldn't that be
Do as
enough?
I do. It's one thing I'm really loving about this series. And also, we're about 6 months apart in age and turning 60. I'm doing 60 quotes for 60 years. And I just think about the growth and the way of maybe letting go. So I'm going to take this off script as normal and think about what are some of your learnings? Because we think about generational, but we also think about 60 years and how you have shifted. Besides, knowing that your purpose is to help other people find their purpose inside themselves. And I really believe that doing the work, which, is what we teach here at Your Wellness Connections, you got to do the work. You've got to drink the water. You've got to take time to sleep. You've got to turn off social media. You got to reconnect to your inner knowing. So tell me a little about some of your 60-year wisdom, just so I can kind of draft off you since you're older than I am.
Wow. Well, I appreciate you acknowledging my 60 years on the planet. So I feel like when I talk about my own journey and I look back and I think about some of the ways that I showed up in the world and some of the ways that I'd led, I'm almost kind of horrified thinking of some of that stuff. And I'll often reference I'm a bit of a slow learner because I'll have people like, oh, I learned that. About 32, I started, developing this insight. And for me, it was probably closer to 50. I mean, maybe like over 45 to things really started to make a lot of sense to me. Because for a while, people would say, do the inner work, or like what we're talking about. And I'm sure there's some listeners that might be saying, I don't even know what this is. And sometimes, it's hard to describe, but I think it's this idea that when we sit quietly and we just are aware of what's happening, we don't have to solve problems, but we just have an awareness. And whether we start meditating, we start walking out in nature, whether we start jumping in an ice bath, whether we start finding hard things to do, like there's all of these different things I think that can help to shed and to unearth the wisdom that we have inside of us. And so I think for a long time as a leader, for me, I wasn't listening. I used spreadsheets and I could make sense of so many things on a spreadsheet, but then I would execute on that and there would be something in my gut that would say this wasn't right, but I would discount that. And so I think the more that I've been able to unearth my own knowing, which is really what are the rituals? What are the things that I'm doing on a daily basis that help me to create the space? And I was at dinner with somebody the other night and they said something really interesting that, over the course of their 70 years in business, they never, like, I wasn't chasing this thing to get to this thing. I was being fully present so that I knew what the next thing was. And I'm like, wow, I missed that when I was young because I was trying to control all of the facets of the next thing. And so I thought, I mean, how wild is that? Just to create enough space, be totally present, that you then only know what the next thing is because you can listen to it. You can feel what that next thing is. So I feel like that's been a lot of my evolution and where I am today, being able to sense and feel into the next thing as opposed to have it written on a spreadsheet or on a piece of paper where I'm trying to force it to happen.
How's your family, how's your boys, your siblings reacting to your way of being the last decade?
Well, I'm not 100% sure I can answer this for my siblings, but as far as my boys, I started a little bit earlier. I was talking about this idea that when my oldest son had a lot of challenges, and I allowed him the space to heal because I started to heal myself. And then as a family, we were really doing our own individual work, which collectively created this really beautiful space. And so, both my boys are absolutely flourishing. And I feel like we're, certainly not perfect parents, but we're creating this spaciousness for them to be able to make mistakes. It's just a conversation we're having the other day on, I think so often in today's world, parents don't let their children make mistakes. Um, and so, and I see, Bayleigh, I see you nodding your head because it's hard because we want to, we want to throw ourselves down so they don't skin their knee. But like at this point, the beauty of watching them skin their knees and to get up and the confidence it builds to know, right, that they can dust themselves off and they can move on. So I would say the boys are flourishing. Barbie and I, my wife, our relationship continues to evolve. And I think so much because we are doing the work of figuring out who we are as individuals, which makes everything better for us as a couple and a family. So I feel pretty proud of that. Even when there's maybe things around me that I don't necessarily agree with or decisions being made, but to know that everybody has this sense of freedom and support within our family. I think so much of that has come from the collective journey that we've been on.
I think that's a lesson I've really had to personally work on is, when you talk about this, there's a pendulum to everything. And so when you're somebody like me, passionate about generational change, you have this mindset of, I am going to make my kids' lives easier. And so I have to catch myself of, okay, am I making it easier or am I actually enabling them? Because they're not getting those failures or those lessons in the same way. And then too, also like the times where I'm scared, I'm like, oh, you're not old enough to do that yet. And then there they go, climbing up the jungle gym, doing it just fine. So there's a lesson in it that I really want our listeners to hear that you brought to the table is there's this, you should have this passion to want to be better and to do better for the generations around you and be present in the moment and understand that their story is their story and their lessons are their lessons. And it's easier said than done, especially when it's loved ones and you want to protect them, you want to keep them from failing. But I know that my life unfolded in a way that every lesson has led into who I am today, that I don't want to make the people around me feel like they don't get those same experiences. And so you've really done it, yes, in your personal life and your professional life. And something you said earlier that, when Dr. Robin was sharing some of her reflections going into 60, she said, Grace carried what spreadsheets couldn't. And as an employee of her, that's a bit stressful sometimes, I'll tell you, following that spirit. But you're headed down that same path, and you talked about how when your organization has that purpose and passion, the numbers follow. And so really, where do leaders find that intersect, that mind, body, spirit, business connection, and where's that leading to the success that you're seeing?
So I love that you asked that. And I was, as I was really looking at small changes, big shifts, I was thinking about Conscious Leaders Quest really is a business version of small changes, big shifts. And when you look at the process that we take people through, it is transformational. But so much of that is about what are the small things that we're willing to do differently. So what we believe at Conscious Leaders Quest is that the only way, and sometimes I think about like, do I want to be this bold about it? But the only way to find our true leadership potential, to unlock the leadership that lives inside of us at its highest version, is at the intersection of mind, body, and business. And so when you look at most leadership programs, retreats, it's about strategy, right? And it almost goes back to the spreadsheet. I mean, it's not always about a spreadsheet, but it's like, it's the strategy. And then it's about things, and we like, how do we learn, right? So that's the mind. But in order for us to be really effective as a leadership, when we walk into a room, we carry an energy with us. Most people carry an energy that is of a lower vibration. And when we can intentionally do the work to move that vibration up, people will feel that. And that, like, as I say this, I know it can feel a little bit woo, but like there's data and science around all of these frequencies. And so when we think about mind, body, and business, it's really about how, as a leader, we move our energy up. So when we walk into a room, things start to come towards us. Like, we're not having to fight, right? It's about things being able to show up in space, and people can feel it. And I think about my own experience going into a meeting and looking around and thinking, what is wrong with my leadership team? Why all of these people, right? How have I amassed this, all of these people that are struggling? And I look back on these times, and it was me. And it was because my energy was low. I was in fight or flight. So much of what I believe that leaders need to do is to figure out how we resource ourselves to outpace the demands of the world. And we move up into this idea of creativity and cycles of giving and receiving, as opposed to fight or flight. And I think it was a really long answer to that question, but I think that, mind, body, business, mind, body, spirit, I think there's just this really beautiful overlap with the work that you guys do in the world and the work that we're trying to do with leaders to help influence how we all show up in the world.
So much wisdom today. And I really think about being a learner, right? Think about Dr. Hawkins in his book, Power versus Force, talking about raising your vibration and how you will help heal the world. And there's ways to do that. So for our listeners, and it's really not woo. You will watch it. You'll walk into a room and you will be attracted to people in there or not attracted to them. And there's that essence of who they are. And then the question I would have is, how do I continue to raise my vibration? That's a question I've asked myself for 3 decades. How do I become better? And not better in my necessarily my craft, but better at reading energy, better at being present, better at listening. And so there's many ways to do that. You'll probably, if you're following us on LinkedIn or social, you'll see that we're talking about ways to do that. And part of it is doing the work. With the common thread from last week's show with Lori is doing the work. We both have done the Hoffman process. Lori's done the Hoffman process. You've done your own Warrior's Ascent. They're all similar, but we're committed to doing the work.
Absolutely.
Speaking of doing the work, I want to give a shout out to the reason we're connected because of Barnett Hellsberg.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the Hellsberg mentoring program. If you were going to think about in a couple sentences what you have learned the last 18 years with Barnett Hellsberg and the Hellsberg mentoring program, any thoughts that come to mind that you want to share?
Yeah, well, I'm so grateful to Barnett for what he's created, this space to be a mentor and to be mentored. And I think I was drawn, and we talk about energy, right? I was drawn to that program back in, I think, 2008. But what that did was it allowed me to really start this journey. And it may have been into that journey a little bit where I had this specific pivotal point. But I do think every decision that we make leads us to the next thing that ultimately I think helped to unlock the essence of who I was as a leader. And I don't know that would be possible without Barnett Hellsberg, Christina Dreiling, you, all of the people of Hemp that created such a safe space to really unlock and to figure out what we needed to, as leaders and mentees and mentors, like, what do we need? What's the next step for us? What are the things? What's the elixir that we need in the world?
To our listeners, always thanks for joining us. Also, to think about what can you do to unlock what's keeping you stuck, whether it's in your spiritual health, your physical health, your chemical health, your energetic, whichever way it is, what can you do? Keep moving. I always say when you're in hell, keep walking. Don't stop and wallow in it, or maybe for 30 seconds or 30 minutes, but not 30 days. And so one thing that's kind of kept me alive through the years is words. And so I wanted to know if you wanted to pick a quote today and see what it means for you. Would you like to do
Absolutely.
that? All right.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right. We don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing. I absolutely love that. And I think it's this idea that we stay in action. Motion is lotion. I think I've heard you say that, right? We keep moving. And I think that we keep moving in a way that helps us to bring in the future that we want to bring in.
Well, as an avid outdoorsman, that was perfect for you.
I wasn't surprised about that.
You weren't surprised about that. Yeah, we always attract what we need to attract. Bayleigh, I'll let you take it from here.
Well, this was fun. Thank you for joining us. And I think that you brought such an insight to our listeners today in a different way. And I always love hearing, people on their own healing journey, whether you're picking it up at luckily how I was being exposed to it at 21, or if it's coming later in life to you, no matter what, it's all about when you decide to do the work. And so to our listeners out there, thank you again for joining us. For those watching us live, welcome to it. We're going to keep producing shows this way where we get to bring Kansas City folks in and have this in-person conversation and have this different energy that I hope you're starting to feel while watching this show. So we'll see you again next week. And until then, we're sending you all big heart-to-heart hugs.